Most scientists believe the universe was created and expanded from an event called the Big Bang. Many galaxies formed in the universe, but planet Earth resides in our galaxy, the Milky Way. In Earth and even the whole universe, many important rules and forces exist. An example is gravity. Gravity is what holds the planets in orbit around the sun. The gravitational pull of the moon pulls the seas towards it, causing the ocean tides. It creates stars and planets. Without gravity, we would just fly upwards forever. Sir Isaac Newton worked in many areas of mathematics and physics. He developed the theories of gravitation in 1666. 20 years later, he presented his 3 laws of motion. How is this related to a person, you may ask? Let us dive into the life of Mr. Burton Hatheway, a man who dedicated over 65 years to study the relationship between science and music, creating a profound new technique to play and teach the piano.
This.
Mr. Burton Hatheway was born on January 10, 1929, and is currently 90 years old. He had a sister and began to learn the piano from a young age. He was and continues to teach many well-known artists and educators, such as John Stetch, Canadian winner of the Du Maurier Grand Prix, and Lisa Kaplan, 3-time Grammy winner of the 8th Blackbird, who is also a professor at the University of Chicago. Mr. Hatheway merged science and music. He has applied physics to balance and movement on the piano in a manner that eliminates physical stress and pain. This series of balances, beginning with playing from the feet, enhances the sound production exponentially.
Then there was a friend of my mother's, just in the neighborhood, of another housewife like my mother was. And although my mother sang and she did play the piano herself, she could play a Mozart sonata. But so that I was given a few lessons by this woman. I don't think she knew a lot. She wasn't really a musician, but nevertheless, it was a little simple stuff. So, but she moved within a year. There was just nothing more. So I kept trying to play the piano. And I couldn't wait to get back to it. So I would think I was 6 by then. And I had lessons. Now, it was a nice teacher, but it was all very old-fashioned technique. It was a high finger touch with a kind of rigid arm. And leaving all that out, it really was basically not the way to do it. And there was necessary to find another teacher. So I went to another a man who was well known in the area, and uh, in high school, and I really began to. I played a lot. I was at the piano all the time. So my grandmother, at that point, my grandfather had died when I was 6, and there were a couple of savings accounts with, I don't know, $400 or $500, for something like $300 in each, and they had grown in interest that my grandfather had left in his will for my sister and I. And Grandma took that money in both accounts and went into New York, and she bought, and it was an older grand. It wasn't exactly the best, but it was a grand piano, and that was brought up so I could continue lessons. Other kids were mystified. How could I possibly be going to film? But I was just drawn to it. And but I was not actually getting great teaching. And in time, I went, although they were nice people. So I went off to a prep school in New England. It was a work-study place. For my freshman year, another boy and I were washing the pots and pans every evening that had fed 500 people. And once in a while, they'd have sausage. And it would take us 3 or 4 hours. You couldn't do more than one pan with any tub. So I didn't mind. I liked all this stuff. But there was a little orchestra out of the players in the school, and in the surrounding area there was a kind of school town combination orchestra. It wasn't actually great, but they got together. And I went to the teacher, who was kind of aware that I was super interested. But I said, do you think that maybe I could play part of a concerto with the orchestra in my senior year? And he thought about it, and they decided it was feasible. I was never satisfied with anything I did my whole younger years, because I really didn't have the kind of substantive knowledge that would have let me play what I could feel.
Handmade in a machine-made universe. Exacting to the millimeter in a close enough culture. Built of genuine hardwood and cast iron in a world of artificiality. For over 160 years, one name has been making instruments so passionately conceived and meticulously crafted. It can take dozens of artisans with decades of experience, 12 months to create one, to enable a sound so rich and resonant and unmistakable and soar.
I was upset about the way I had played, even though other people were saying, wow, but I didn't feel that way. And so by that time, I had been accepted at Yale for music history, which I was dying to do. And it was so everything, and I had been given scholarships, otherwise I would not have been there. So these are all memories, and I was getting praise. By my sophomore year at Yale, I was studying with a teacher at the music school. Only 3 or 4 of us in my whole class of 1,000 had gotten a teacher in the music school. And but I just knew something isn't right. I can't get out what I feel. And playing bigger pieces, they just wouldn't come out. So I actually, courageously, with a stab in the dark, I quit lessons. But actually inside I got extremely depressed, my grades fell, and I just knew inside music is what I want to be involved with. I got the courage up in the spring of my junior year to go down to the Manhattan School of Music in New York, have an interview with the head of the school, and I said to her, I'd like to study with Dora Zaslavsky. Well, that was like asking for God at the Manhattan School of Music, and she's kind of raised an eyebrow. But I sat down, I played a rather big Bach toccata for her, and she asked me to play a scale, and she said, she kind of changed her tone. And she said, well, she said, I can tell that you have worked very hard, and these are more or less her words, and you really like this. So come back in the fall, and if you have a place you could come down here, and Dora is able to take somebody, we will give it a try. Well, that actually was a lifeline for me. That opened all the doors I needed.
Being able to do almost whatever I want with the piano. It stimulates my fantasy, it makes me want more, which is a beautiful feeling.
After 2 or 3 years of working with her, the teacher that I had at Yale, this was the Opus 2 No. 3 Beethoven Sonata, which I played on a repertoire workshop. And when he showed it to me, it begins with a little trill, kind of in double thirds, full of life, youth, and very, very energetic, but quiet and sort of open-ended. When you listen to it, it should sound like, where is he going to take this? It's very, very powerful. And I couldn't do it, but after a year of working with Dora, and he sat down at the piano, he was a nice man and rather scholarly, but nobody seemed to know how to move on a keyboard. By the time I got out of Manhattan, I really did know how to move on a piano and to get the kind of sounds. Even right now, that's a dull thud, and that's an alive tone, and there isn't any pitch. And yet, you have to line yourself up to do it correctly. Down here on the sit bone, and I'm not going to do this and lift from my elbow or from my front of my shoulder. I'm going to get tired and it could start to hurt, but I'm lifting from way down here on this bench, and I don't use my shoulder and my arm until I have stretched all the way up my back. I'm like, it looks like it's endless. I could stretch forever, but all this time I'm resting on a fulcrum, which is the bench. And then, but now here, I'm going to prove that from the bench up, I can drop my whole arm. That is momentum. It'll go all by itself. You are not using any more force because it started from rest.